Welcome everyone to our Q&A workshop today with John Christy Johnson. So before we start, just wanted to say a huge thank you to John for taking the time out of your busy schedule. And thank you to everyone for joining, whether you are just starting school, just soaking up the last few days of your exam break, or starting work or anything. But thank you so much for taking the time to join on this lovely Thursday evening. So right before we start, just a quick and short biography about John. So John is a medical student as well as a Master's of Science in Biomedical Engineering student at the University of Alberta and a recent 2021 Stars of Alberta Volunteer Award recipient. He is a researcher at the Rehabilitation Robotics Club and a program manager for the Antarctic Institute of Canada, which is an academic not-for-profit organization that has spearheaded a $2 million national internship program. He co-founded two disability-based startups, which are Click and Push Accessibility Inc. and UMove. He also has an identical twin brother, and he enjoys trail running in his spare time. So now I will pass the virtual microphone to John just for a brief introduction on his part.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Jing. So I will just speak a little bit about my journey, and maybe then we can open it up and make it a little bit more interactive, and people can ask any questions if they have any, or if people are shy, they can also just pop it down in the chat and we can get some interaction going that way. So without further ado, I'll just share my screen here. Okay, and then let's get that started. Okay, perfect. All right, is everyone ready? Can everyone hear me? Can I get a thumbs up? Awesome. Okay, so my journey. So I first started off my undergraduate degree kind of lab hopping. So I found that there was a lot of time that I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I've always wanted, when I was young, I've always wanted to be a doctor when I grew up, but I didn't really know how to go about doing it. And during high school, I wasn't really the most extroverted person. I would be quite shy, and I didn't really talk to a lot of people or know anything about the details of getting in. So I felt that this was something that was very challenging for me, just having not too much experience, not too much of a background in what to expect when pursuing medicine. So that's why when I first started, I kind of did some lab hopping. I went from research lab to research lab because I knew that you would need some level of academia and some level of research experience before applying to medicine, or that's what I thought. So I was trying to do that, and I basically went from lab to lab, but I found that I didn't really enjoy any single one of them. I found most of it was kind of wet lab research, so it was a lot of like molecular genetics and lab experiences, so like using test tubes and being in dark rooms. And personally, I found that it wasn't really working out for me. So I would be going in and doing like 4 to 5 hours of lab experience where I'm stuck in a dark room and I'm looking through microscope slides. And I found I really wasn't enjoying that experience. So I started to look to other labs. And this was kind of my experience. This is how I felt I felt like I don't know what I'm doing. There's so much dark rooms. I was getting gray hair. No, I wasn't actually getting gray hair, but I just put that in there because I was quite stressed. And then what eventually happened was I stumbled upon a lab that I actually enjoyed. So that was the Rehabilitation Robotics lab for me. And this lab was really interesting in the sense that it was something that I've never been able to experience before. So these are some of the things that we do in our lab. So on the left, what you can see is someone pushing a wheelchair in a motion capture suit. So you might have seen these from looking at like the behind the scenes of Pixar movies and things like that. But basically what these are these motion capture suits that can detect the way that you're moving around in three-dimensional space, and then you can superimpose that. So that's kind of what I was learning. And what we did was we did a wheelchair biomechanics project, and we did it in virtual reality. So this is basically a space, a virtual space that we created for the Butterdome, which is basically this huge track field in the University of Alberta. And it's an indoor track field, so we were able to simulate that and kind of use that track space in a virtual environment. And this is basically a cube setup. And we have a user in that cube setup, and they can basically negotiate around that environment. And that's something that I found was super interesting for me. And that's kind of what led me to pursue my master's degree in biomedical engineering. So some of the things that we started to do in the lab was we were able to really use the biomechanics technology. So there's a lot of cool technology that we were able to use. So this is basically a markerless motion capture system. So you can basically track people's movements and basically record the data without having any markers at all. This is a tele-rehab setup. So you can basically get this, you can get someone to do certain activities in this space, but then you can have someone in the other side of the globe, for example, pick up that data. So this is becoming something that we've been doing a lot more, especially with COVID and some of the barriers around people not being able to get to the doctor and being unable to actually physically get from point A to point B, or if they're scared of getting any sick contacts on the way. So that's some of the things that we did. And then we also tried to take what we learned in the lab and we tried to apply it to a business. So this is the program that Jing mentioned at the beginning. So this is Click and Push Accessibility Inc. And basically what it is it's a business that we spun off using our research. So what we can do is we can basically make these types of heat maps. I don't know if you guys can actually see my cursor, but I'm pointing to the picture on the right there. And what we can do is we can actually make these heat maps, and they'll tell you how difficult it is for someone in a wheelchair to push across this particular area. So we mapped Old Strathcona area, and what we found were there were some hotspots and areas where it was super difficult for people in wheelchairs to actually go over. So that was something that we did as a project, but then we also commercialized that, and we actually made an app which then lets you know, which is a wayfinding app. So it lets people who are in wheelchairs know which paths are harder to travel in and which parts are actually easier to travel in. So this is some ways in which we were able to take what we did in the lab and kind of apply it to the bedside. And then that kind of was the next step for me after that was really getting into medicine. And I think after that, I've just found that my background in biomedical engineering had significantly put me at an advantage in terms of applying to medical school, because a lot of times what happens is people look at the experiences of certain people when they're trying to assess if they're a suitable fit for medical school. And I found that my biomedical engineering background suddenly became highly useful, especially when we were thinking about the future of medicine. And the future of medicine is one which really relies on things like robotics and virtual reality and prosthetics. And these were things that I became very comfortable in during my graduate degree. So all in all, I like to kind of wrap it up here and just end it on this note. And this is sort of where I'm going towards in the future. So looking as a medical student right now, one of the advantages that I have is being able to work with so much great people. And this is actually a surgery that's being done using the Da Vinci robotic surgical system. And this is something that's very unique to Edmonton and Alberta, in the sense that we have this just like right at our home, and we can actually use this types of technology to perform surgeries that are not possible otherwise. So I think just looking through my journey, I think there's been a lot that's been done, and I would have never imagined that I could have done any of this in high school. And so it just goes to show that, like, even though like at one point you may be, quite unsure and not really certain about what direction you want to go in, if you keep on applying yourself, and if you just keep going and you don't give up, then eventually you might find yourself somewhere like how I was able to find myself. And with that, I would just like to conclude my presentation and open up the floor for any questions.
Thank you so much, John. That was a really informative slideshow and really impressive background of your academic and I guess medical journey. And yeah, without further ado, we will just dive right into the questions since we have collected a lot of them. And for sure, if you have any questions you thought of during the meeting, feel free to just type it in the chat, and then we will help announce it. And yeah, so I will like to invite Jessica and Wendy, who will help with facilitating our Q&A section. I know Jessica is currently in another class right now, so I will help cover her section until she joins. So we have divided our questions into kind of two main areas. So one is mainly about high school and volunteering extracurriculars, and the other is kind of about, John, your background and your advice of certain things. So without further ado, I will just start with some questions about high school. So in these times of COVID-19, how can someone make most of their time? So for example, where or how to gather volunteer opportunities or work experience given the situation of the current pandemic?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I think the way to go about it is actually use the fact that we are doing a lot more things virtually, like as an actively like a strength. So you can actually use that to reach out to folks like across Canada or across the globe even. And you can ask like research profs or folks that you might know, like, and try to get into virtual placements. So that's one thing that me and my brother were able to do. So we were able to contact profs. So you just need to go to like a faculty website in a university, and you can search up scientists or researchers who you're interested in, and really try to send them just cold emails and say, I'm a high school student and I'm really interested in doing this type of research. And typically they'll get back to you. Sometimes it'll take long for them to get back to you, but like it's really like there's nothing you can lose, especially because virtual internship or like virtual opportunities for research is actually something that's very common. And if you can actively get a position, you might be able to get a publication, which ends up looking really good on any applications like med school applications or even graduate school applications down the line. So I think that's one way you can really use the pandemic to your advantage. There's a lot of virtual internships, which I'm happy to connect with Jing, or if you would like me to like just pop some down in the chat, I can also do that.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. And just before we continue, just wanted to say that if we don't get through all the questions today, John said that he'd be happy to provide his contact information below if you guys would like to follow up with any questions. So thank you so much, John, again with that. And next up, just follow up with your background and your advice. I'll pass it on to Wendy.
Hi, John. So from my end, I wanted to ask, since you're quite young and you've achieved so many things, it's very incredible. So how did you manage to achieve so much in such a short period of time? And what are some of your very strong time management skills? What would you recommend that we do to better manage our time?
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. That's a really good question. So I think part of it I would have to say is definitely kind of drive and motivation. For me, like I find that it kind of came second nature to me, just being I have an identical twin brother, and I find that I'm quite competitive. So I found that that was really like a huge motivator for me, and I always wanted to, one up my brother. So I think that was kind of one of the reasons why I was trying extra hard. And I guess from a more, just to address like that second part of the question, so really thinking about the ways in which people can use time management just doing like random things. And I find like that's actually true for like everyone to a certain degree. And the way to really overcome that is to try to give yourself like some breaks as you do you like some really deep work. So for example, let's say you're get into medical school. To do some of these things, it requires a lot of stamina. So if you're doing, say, for example, the Mcat, which is a full day exam, what you need to do is you need to try to develop your stamina. So simply doing like, 20 minutes of studying might not cut it. What you would want to do instead is to try and dedicate like a solid 3 hours towards doing something. But also we have very limited time spans and attention spans. So it could be quite difficult to do that. So the one way that I've been doing to try and kind of perfect my studying has been the Pomodoro Method. And basically what it involves is you can, it's kind of like circuit training where you can specify like 30 minutes towards doing like super hard work and then kind of rewarding yourself in intervals and having kind of short breaks and then coming back to the work that you were doing. So I found that this was working super well for me, especially when I was studying for the Mcat. And it was a way in which I was able to really leverage like the time to my advantage because I found that it was quite easy for me to get distracted. So just kind of being able to get rid of all the distractions in your house, it would be a good start. I think getting rid of like your phone or like putting it on silent and putting it away, trying to make sure that you're not like distracted by food. So like I try to like store everything away in the cupboards so I don't see it and it's not in front of me. And just like have like my desk all cleaned up and properly arranged because I find that like when your desk is decluttered, your mind can also become decluttered and you can really start by like focusing in on what you need to be focusing in on. So yeah, so those are just some tips that I would kind of address to like get started on doing some like super productive work or trying to like achieve like a huge task in like a short period of time.
Awesome. So, yeah, thank you for answering that question, John. And we will move on to our next question, which will go back to high school and volunteering. And just before we start, I see that Jessica has joined us here. So, Jessica, would you be good with asking the next question, please?
All right, no problem. Let me just pull it up. Okay, so regarding high school, the next question is, what courses or extracurriculars would you recommend to high school students looking to go into medicine?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I believe that there's quite a few courses that I did during my high school. There was Math 31, I believe, and then there was Bio 30 IB as well. I found that doing like IB and AP courses are good because they tend to save you from doing some coursework in university. So for if you want, you could try to do some of those courses and try to get a head start. I find that those ones were quite a bit more challenging, especially at the high school level. So they typically do require a little bit more time commitment in terms of trying to study and prepare for the assessments. I found that though the IB courses, like if you can score like a 6 or a 7 for these courses, then you're pretty much like at a really good spot when you're starting your university. And I would definitely recommend those for coursework. In terms of extracurriculars, I think doing some sports, doing music, doing whatever other hobbies that you find are useful for you or you find enjoyable, I think you should definitely keep on focusing there because when you're applying for things like medical school and even graduate school to a certain degree, they do look for well-rounded people. And if you can show that you're able to perform at a high level, like outside of the discipline of medical sciences or the medical profession, that also shows character to a certain degree. So I think those would be good endeavors to keep doing it. So, if you're doing like, for example, violin, and and if you can dedicate yourself to violin and try to get like to the highest level that you can during high school, I think those would be like worthy endeavors to keep going for, because at the end of the day, even though it's not like as relevant to say, curing people or there are ways in which you can like tie it back, because a lot of times practicing the violin, it's a lot about diligence and hard work. And that's similar. Those are the same types of qualities that people look for in very professional programs like law and medicine. So I think there are ways in which certain skills you develop in those endeavors can be transferred.
Thank you, John. And before we move on back to your background and device, it would be good to address our question in the chat from Evan. So Evan had a few questions. One is, what is the difference between studying for a dual degree and having a major and minor?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when you're in undergraduate, in an undergraduate degree, you can do a major and a minor. When you're past an undergraduate degree at the graduate level, or if you're at the postgraduate level, then you can start doing, or if you're doing like a professional program, then you can start doing dual degrees. So for example, like right after high school, you'll typically be in an undergraduate program. So that's when you would need to declare a major or a minor, or alternatively, you can do a specialization or honors program in which you would specialize in only one subject. And then after you finish your undergraduate degree, you can apply for dual degrees. So you could either do, so for me, I did an MD MSc. So that's a master's program, which is a graduate program, and then a medicine program, which is undergraduate, but it's considered post undergrad, like it's post undergraduate. So it would be like a second undergraduate degree.
And so I guess you have covered on how to apply for either option. And then onto our last question from Evan is it possible to enter med school only after 2 years of undergrad? If so, how is this done?
Yes, so certain schools would have that as a requirement. So I can't remember off the top of my head, but I believe there were the University of Calgary in the past had the system where you could enter after only 2 years. There was also that system at the University of Alberta. However, they recently changed it so that you would need a complete you would need to complete an undergraduate degree before applying to medicine. So you would have to look across Canada to see if there are medical programs which allow you to do this. My understanding is that there are still a couple that only require 2 or 3 years, but there are others which you would need to complete your undergraduate degree. Yeah, so you would just need to look into the application guidelines for that.
Thank you. We can move on to the next question about background and advice facilitated by Wendy. And we can move back to Gregory's question after that, if that's good.
All right. From your experiences and your background, the next question is there something you consider essential into getting into medical school, and what would that be?
Yeah, that's a solid question as well. I think that for me, it would be persistence. It was just a matter of like keeping on trying. I think the first time like I applied was in my second year actually of my university undergraduate degree. So during that time, it was still like when you only needed 2 years. And I applied first and I didn't get anything back. And then I applied every other year that I was in my undergrad, and then when I did grad school as well. And so if I counted all in total, that was like 5 times. So I only got in after like 5 rejections, right? So I think it's really about keeping on trying. Like every time you try, you might learn something new. And like when I was my 3rd time, I got my interview for the first time. So after they review your application, they will contact you for an interview typically. And then after the interview, I actually managed to get waitlisted in my 4th time. And then, but I didn't get selected. And then the last time I did, I was able to get in without being waitlisted. So I think at the end of the day, it just goes to show that if at any point I had decided that I wanted to stop, I wouldn't have been able to get into the professional program that I chose and I desired. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, if you keep at it, eventually you'll be able to achieve your dreams.
Thank you. Yeah, that really highlights the power of dedication and being motivated, and it's really amazing to see your achievements today. So we will get back to Gregory's question just for clarification of first year life sciences courses. Is that a set selection? And also, what are the requirements for med school after first year?
Okay, yeah, no, that's a fair question. So I believe that right now, the University of Alberta, and I believe this is similar to the UFC program as well, is that they don't have a requirement for life sciences anymore. So you could basically be doing an arts program and then apply for medicine, and you might actually get in. So the rationale for why they did this is because they're now looking for people who are more well-rounded. And the end of the day, you want doctors who are good communicators and people who are empathetic and able to relate to patients and be able to advocate for them. So if you did an arts, for example, if you did an arts undergrad, or if you did like a philosophy undergrad or something like that, those would still be all counted towards like a medical application. At the end of the day, they only care if you do have necessary knowledge to pass the Mcat, which is basically at the end of the day, it's like high school biology and chemistry plus a little bit extra, which I would assume would be covered in most first years of the undergraduate programs. I'm trying to see if there was anything else to that question. Yeah, so and then what are the requirements for med school after first year? So, okay, so the other requirements are there is a coursework requirement. So there are certain courses that you need, which include biochem, biology, chemistry, and physics. These courses are basically designed to help you more so for the Mcat, the application test. And so those are some of the requisite coursework that you will need. Besides those, you also have 4 different sections that you need to fill out for your medical school application, give or take, for different schools. I can get into that. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else though before. Yeah, so I can get into that as well. So in the University of Alberta application, the 4 things that they look for are first, your medical school's application test results. So the Mcat results, I believe you need above 400. I don't remember the exact number, but you need to have passed the Mcat at least. And in order to be competitive, I believe you need to be above the 70th percentile. Then they look at your GPA. 50% of what goes into whether or not you get in is your GPA. So being able to maintain a grade point average, which is at least above a 3.5. And if you want to be competitive, they typically, I believe the competitive GPA was 3.8 last year. And then after a GPA, they'll look at extracurriculars. So what do you volunteer? Do you do things outside of school? Are you doing like any businesses? Are you like playing like other musical instruments, or do you have like other hobbies outside of school? And then the last one, I believe, is leadership. So being able to demonstrate that you can lead and make decisions. I think one of my professors, actually, he likes to say that the full form for MD is make a decision. So really, if you can do that, I think that's also one of the critical things that a lot of schools look for. So those are the 4 things on our application that I feel are kind of requirements across the board that all schools look at. And if you have like awards or specific achievements to boot, I think those would all be good to include as well. I hope that makes sense. And feel free to ask any clarifying questions if anything I said does not make that much sense.
Okay, I think there was a clarifying question from someone shortly after that said, you mentioned that you had applied 5 times before being accepted. So were you required to retake the Mcat each time you reapplied, or were you allowed to reuse scores from previous years?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good question. So they accept you to reuse the Mcat scores up to 5 years. So once you write the Mcat exam, you can use that same exam score for subsequent times that you take it. I retook the Mcat exam just because I was trying to make it more competitive. But what I found was after the first year that I had taken it, it was kind of like a law of diminishing returns, because I found that I wasn't as brushed up on the first year content. And that's actually what they test for most of the Mcat exams anyways. So I found that I had started forgetting something, and I didn't do as well the second time I wrote it as my first time. So I would advise people, if they are interested in going into medicine, to try to take the Mcat exam right after their first year, because all of the content is fresh in your memory, and you can kind of regurgitate what you learned at the end of the year a lot easier than, say, when you're after your 4th year, when you've probably finished, you've kind of reached the culmination of your degree, and you most likely have very specialized knowledge. So that's actually what I found in my second time that I wrote it. I found that I was, because I did life sciences undergrad, I find that my biology section I did super well in, but the other sections were not as great. So I definitely recommend, like, if you're able to do it right after during the summer of your first year, then that would probably be what would help you with the best marks. But I'm speaking from a very personal experience.
Thank you. And I think Sean did follow up with a question that said, does the university still take the highest Mcat score if the second attempt scored lower?
Yes, they typically do look at the highest exam score, although they are able to view all of the scores that are on the file.
Thank you for clarifying. And now we will switch back to the questions we have pre-collected with Wendy.
Okay, so our next question from more of the background area is, how do you avoid deep procrastination and burnout while maintaining important activities?
Yeah, I think that's like my everyday struggle. I find that like procrastination to a certain degree, like I don't think I can ever avoid it to a complete degree, but I think what I can do is like I try to facilitate like an attitude where if ever you have to do something, to try and get it done as soon as possible. So like just like directly when you hear about it, try to make some action on it. So for example, if you were like in a club and someone asked you to contact a sponsor, for example, just try to what I try to do is I just try to draft up an email right away so I don't forget. And that way, like at least you've started on it right away. And even if you do procrastinate, it'll kind of be bugging you at the back of your mind, and you'd want to finish something that you've already started. So I kind of use that as a way to trick my brain into avoiding procrastination. And I think that might be helpful for some people.
Yes, thank you. That's very helpful. Are there any methods that you use to prevent burnout?
Yeah, so there are a couple. So I like to run, which I find is really good for just stress relief. And it's kind of like a mindless task, so you can kind of distract yourself from whatever you're feeling stressed out about. And I also just enjoy like cutting back and just having time with the family, and enjoying a couple of movies or TV shows when I get a chance, and just finding times to relax. And I think also food helps me a lot to get through a lot of things. So yeah, I've had a little bit of a sweet tooth over the Christmas break, and I've been trying a lot of different cakes and whatnot.
Okay, so I guess we'll go to our next question from more of the high school standpoint again. So let's see, we have, what kinds of volunteer activities are useful for medical careers?
Yeah, so I would really say the sky's the limit in terms of volunteerism, just because I found that I got involved in quite a few volunteer experiences during my undergrad and then in my graduate degree. And a lot of times I found that they just kind of came to me, like I didn't actively have to apply myself to find the volunteer positions. But maybe that's also because I did do a little bit of volunteering like in my first year, and I found that I connected up with other friends who were volunteering elsewhere. And I found that the networks just grew as I went through my undergraduate degree and I started volunteering more and more. So for me, just speaking personally, I was doing volunteering at the hospital. I think that's important just to make sure that like medicine is what you want to do, because at the end of the day, you don't want to apply to something that you're not interested in. So definitely have the chance to volunteer at like a hospital or a care facility. So for me, I worked at the Capital Care Foundation, where they have seniors with dementia, and we looked after them for mealtime assistance and hospitality. So really being able to talk with patients and staff to make sure that this is something that you would like to do in your everyday life, because once you actually become a doctor, or if you become a nurse or something like that, what you'll have to do is you'll have to be able to be comfortable with dealing with patients. And sometimes there are some what we call difficult patients, although we don't want to ever call someone a difficult patient. But there are people who might be a little bit more challenging to deal with. And I think that comes with any profession. So really trying to expose yourself to some of the worst parts of medicine before you actually commit. And I think that's a good way to go about volunteering, especially if you're trying to volunteer for the purposes of getting into medicine. Other volunteer that I would suggest is leadership experiences. So at our universities, we have different clubs, and you can typically go at the start of the year to clubs fair, or if they have like a week of welcome event where you can actually go and scout out the different clubs and see where you're interested in. And I found that like I joined a couple clubs. There was a running club that I joined, and after volunteering with them for a year, I was then able to apply to the next level, and I applied for an executive position. So, and then I was able to get that executive position as well. And we were able to do some work actually to facilitate a mentorship program, a coaching program for students. And I think that was one of the things that I did end up putting on my medical school application. And that was something that was quite different from a lot of other applicants. And I think that's what helped me to stand out. And if you can use your volunteering to like really take ownership of and use it in a way that allows you to say that this is something that I did because I'm passionate about, then I think that'll be communicated when you're applying later on for jobs, or even if you're applying for like medical school or graduate school or something like that.
Thank you. So now we will answer some questions from the chat. One from Jenny that says, I'm wondering if Canadian med schools look favorably to applicants with a graduate degree. Do they perhaps add bonus points to your application if you have completed a master's degree? Example.
Yes, they do. They do give you a bonus point, but only some schools do that. So I'm pretty sure both U of C and U of A do that. And I believe U of T as well. Just because what they realize is that master's students do have a little bit more of, they have a quota for that, because a lot of medical students and medical residents do go on to do more research and contribute to academia, because that's quite important for us to keep up with the trends and the future of medicine. So especially like if you're doing something at the cutting edge, like cancer research or research that involves cardiovascular disease, because these are areas where there's a high mortality rate. So a lot of people die from disease, or there's a lot of complications that can arise, which can be problematic. So these are areas where they do look favorably upon master's students. And typically lots of master's programs are 2 years. So it is possible to endeavor in that area. And if you're quite passionate about it, like for me, I found that I was super passionate about the virtual reality and working with the technology. I would encourage you to go that route. But if you're someone who doesn't really enjoy research, like for example, like I didn't really enjoy the wet lab research that I was doing. So just because it was a lot of pipetting, and I actually got like blisters on my hands after like pipetting so much. And so I felt like some of that was not what I really wanted to do at the end of the day. So definitely like keep your eyes open, because you might not want to do a certain type of research, but you might be interested in like biomedical engineering or something like that, like me. So I would say to keep your eyes peeled, but obviously like don't stress over it if you don't want to do it. But it is one way which you can make yourself more competitive.
All right, so I guess we'll tackle another one from the chat because it just came up. Is it generally better to apply after you receive the master's, or can you apply while you're still in graduate school?
So yes, that's actually one of the tricky things that might happen. So if you're applying, like say after your first year, you might want to talk with your supervisor. So for graduate school, you typically have a preceptor or supervisor or someone that you're working under or with, and they would be invested in whatever project that you decide to start on, because a thesis project is unlike, say, like a undergraduate project or like a high school project, because you actually need to have an active role in it for the period of 2 years or 1 year and a half, for example. So you actually need to be involved, and the supervisor will also be invested in the work that you're completing. So if you're not able to complete your project and you've kind of started on it, it's very hard for somebody else to pick up on that project, especially when you have a lot of specialized information about that topic. So some supervisors don't actually allow you to, or they look negatively on students who decide to like apply after their first year. For my case, I found that because I was upfront about it with my supervisor and I mentioned that I am interested in medicine and that I would be applying, it was okay. And he was also willing to write a reference for me. So I think at the end of the day, it does matter like who your supervisor is, as well as the level of communication you have with that supervisor, because it really depends.
Some thanks, and we'll move back to background and advice section for now.
So our next question is, was medical school more difficult than you anticipated, or was it different to what you were expecting?
Yeah, so I think I would have to say, like, I have a very unique experience of medical school, just because the moment we started was when the pandemic started. So all of our classes were online and the way we did interviews was online. So I think it's a very different experience, say, if you talk to me versus someone from an year above me or an year below me, just because of the new circumstances that we had. But I found that it was actually not as bad, like once I got in, particularly because I had a life sciences background. A lot of things were kind of reviewed during that first year. But the actual course content, it's a lot heavier. So I found that I had to spend more time. It wasn't necessarily more difficult, but I found that I had to spend more time reviewing the content and actually trying to understand some of the physical exam maneuvers and being able to go to an anatomy lab and try to do some of the procedures that they do there.
Thank you. And we see a follow-up from Jenny saying, in terms of publication, do med schools care about what kind of publication you have? Do you have to have a first author paper or a paper in a big journal?
Typically, you don't, that's not a requirement, but it does add to your application. University of Calgary in particular is very intent on publications. So there are like certain schools like that who actively look to see whether you have published in a peer-reviewed journal. There's also other, they also mention like non-peer-reviewed publications, which are viewed favorably as well. But obviously peer-reviewed and first authored publications do have a little bit more of an import, and they would be valued higher.
All right, thank you. So I guess we'll go back to high schooler questions. This one says, during high school, do I always have to be uptight and on task all the time to be successful? Do I constantly have to be doing things that will benefit me in the future, or is it okay to take breaks at times?
Yeah, I think high school is like very early. Definitely like take breaks in high school and try to actually enjoy high school, because I think like looking in retrospect, I found that there were certainly opportunities that I didn't take full advantage of in high school. So I think, you know, if you're able to, you know, kind of relax and enjoy and make friends, I think friends, like making friends is definitely one thing that I wanted to do more of when I was in high school, because I found that like with my classmates, like we kind of drifted off after high school, but just because there wasn't too much communication, and I found that like my friendships weren't as strong as the ones that I made in my undergraduate degree. So you know, if you're able to participate in like social gatherings and activities and really enjoy high school, then I think that would be better, because at the end of the day, high school diplomas only count towards like your undergraduate degree. And then when you're applying to a professional program, they don't even look at high school marks anymore. So at the end of the day, like it's just like one small step, and there's so much more steps in your life that I wouldn't worry about it.
All right, thank you, John. Our next question from more background and on your experiences. We actually have a question from a parent, and it says, what can parents do to assist their children to achieve high goals? And what were some of the things that your parents or guardians did to assist you in your successes?
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting question, particularly because I don't have too much experience from the parenting side of things. But I think one thing that me and my brother's parents that they did very well was giving us our own like space to kind of grow and be ourselves. Because at the end of the day, I found that there was a lot of things that we kind of took for granted from our parents. So being able to like, you know, be in a house, be able to get access to like food on demand kind of thing. But a lot of times like there are chances and opportunities like where you need to go outside. And for example, like when I was doing research, I don't think I was like really at home for a majority of the time, particularly because there was a lot of demands that was asked of me at work. So, you know, like being able to facilitate your child's development, I think giving them responsibilities is definitely the way to do it. Allow them to be independent. If they want, they can do like part-time jobs, or if they want to do like a certain type of research, to try and be supportive of that. And, you know, like a lot of times when they're doing these types of things, they'll encounter like people, and they might encounter like problems that they have to deal with. And because a lot of people might be like not necessarily the same way that our parents are, there may be like toxic people, or there may be co-workers who are hard to get along with. I think those are all really good growth opportunities for your children, particularly because you'll have to negotiate like these types of people like later down the road as well. So being able to deal with a lot of different people from a lot of different walks of life, I think that can really help your child to grow. And if you can find ways to be supportive of that, I think that's a really good way to be a parent. Although I'm not like a parent, so like take everything that I say with a grain of salt.
Thank you. We see a question in the chat from Reina, which you have already kind of touched on a bit, about the universities in Canada taking second-year undergraduate students into med school, because you did say UFC and UFA are changing their rules now. Do you happen to know any other universities?
Not off the top of my head, but I want to say UBC. You would have to look into that a little bit more, but I think the last time that I checked, UBC was accepting like only 2 years or 3 years. So if you can like look into that, I think so. There's only like I want to say 16 medical schools across Canada, and if you're looking for any of those, you would definitely have like I think 2 or 3 of those schools, which are kind of like you need like an undergraduate degree to actively get it. But there are other places like a lot of the Ontario schools, you don't need to really worry about that, because they are typically a little bit more liberal. Internationally, you can apply to a lot of different medical schools, that just like with high school diplomas even. So there isn't that requirement if you're just trying to go about that internationally. So that's also like an option, and that's also something that I've considered in the past as well.
Okay, thank you for addressing that. We have one more question under the high school category, and it says, how beneficial is taking full IB in high school? Does it really make a difference in the long run? And how does the life of a person who has taken full IB differ from a person who has not?
In the long run, I don't think it matters. I think it just in the short term, it was helpful for me because I was able to avoid a couple courses in my first year. So it was a little bit less stressful than some of my colleagues. But yeah, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Full IB, though, I believe does do a good job of kind of introducing you to a lot of university relevant coursework and university relevant experiences. So I think like just in that sense, it was a really good way to prepare yourself for some of the more high stakes and higher demand of work that you'll need to complete during university. But again, not a requirement.
Sounds good. Thank you for explaining. We have some questions in the chat. It says, could you please give more detail by the Antarctic Institute of Canada that you mentioned you were part of?
Yeah, sure. The Antarctic Institute of Canada is a research agency. It's a not-for-profit organization that really helps students with publications and being able to get their feet wet in terms of research. And it's something that me and my brother have been extensively involved in, and something that we're really hoping to help students like many of you here, because we recognize that a lot of students don't have the opportunity to do a lot of work over the summer. So what we're doing is we're partnering with a couple of governmental agencies and helping students get funded over the summer to participate in research experiences. And that's something that we actually started in 2020. As Jing mentioned at the beginning, we made the Sharpen the Quill program. And last year, it actually grew to a program which funded $2 million, over $2 million for students. And I think we had like around 200 students last year for this program. And each of those students was responsible for writing articles or books. And in doing so, they were able to report that on their CVs and also at the same time get an opportunity to really develop their communication skills, particularly written communication.
Thank you. We have a few more questions about background and advice, which Wendy can help facilitate.
So our next question is, what sparked your interest to study medicine, and was there anything holding you back at that time? And if there were, how did you overcome those challenges?
Pardon, could you repeat the first part of that question?
Yes, for sure. What sparked your interest to study medicine?
Okay, so for me, what really sparked my interest was the fact that I was living with a lot of folks back in rural India who had medical conditions. There was a lot of my own like close family who had disabilities, so hearing impairments and mobility impairments and cardiovascular disease, which runs in the family. So I think part of it was really being able to see some of these things. I really wanted to make a difference and be able to help folks like my family, just having known the stresses and all of the things that come with health scares. So I'm sure there's many of you who may have similar experiences within the family if people have struggled with disease or if they've struggled with a traumatic event of some sort. So I think that's really what sparked my interest to try and make a difference. But at the same time, it was also kind of selfish on my part because I wanted to learn a little bit more about what was ways in which we could improve our own health. So using that medical background, I was hoping that I could also take the necessary steps to improve my own health.
Okay, thank you so much. The next question under that is, how many years of schooling on average do physicians or medical researchers need to complete?
Yeah, so I guess if you wanted like an average number, if you wanted to include high school or excluding high school?
Let's say including high school.
Including high school, so that's like 12 years. Let's add that to 8 years and then maybe like a master's degree. So in total, I would say that's on average 24 years. Yeah. So a long time. But if you were to exclude high school, like 12 years, and the way I'm doing that calculation is just 4 years of undergrad, 2 years if you wanted to do a master's, and then, which is not necessary, and then an additional 2 years or an additional 4 years for your medical school, and then 2 years if you wanted to do a family medicine residency. And if you wanted to specialize in other residency, that can take longer because family is the shortest one of the mix.
Thank you. And we have another question in the chat from Gregory that he's wondering what is the difference between a specialization or a honors degree and a normal undergrad degree, which includes a major and a minor. And is it all right to choose a specialization degree, even though I'm not sure what career I would like?
Yeah, so with the specialization, it's typically a program which puts you in a cohort of like-minded students. So like at the end of the day, for me, I think the decision really depends on what type of learner you are. If you learn more with like a group of people, I think specialization and honors programs could be really useful. So for me, like we were in an honors program, so I was able to have very much the same classmates for a lot of my coursework. And I found that was helpful for me because we had study groups going on, and it was really useful because we all knew like relatively the same background. So it was easy to talk to one another. And then the specialization versus the honors, the difference is just that in specialization, you can actively do a little bit more coursework, but in honors, in your final year, you need to do an undergraduate thesis. So I would say an honors degree is more preparatory for you to do a graduate degree. So if you're thinking about a graduate degree, then I would recommend honors. If you're thinking about just specializing because you like the group environment, then I would recommend specialization.
Thank you, John. Our next question is, what motivates you and what are you most passionate about with medicine?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of things to be passionate about, I think, within medicine. For me, it's really looking at rehabilitation robotics. That's kind of my area of interest. So really looking at ways which we can use technology and help people. I found that like doing that, like I just find like I'm more of a hands-on type of person, and I really enjoy working with cool tech. And that was kind of what drew me to that area of medicine. And at the end of the day, we can help improve people's quality of life. So for me, like that really meant being an advocate for people with disability, people who are in wheelchairs, for example, and people who need like prostheses. So if they've lost a limb, they can use prosthetics to try and regain function. So I think those are things that I'm very passionate about.
Okay, thank you so much for answering that. I'm going to see, we have another question from Jenny. I'm going to let Jing address that because there is an earlier question I think that we went over. So this one, does the volunteer opportunity for, I'm going to interpret this as, are there any volunteer opportunities for grade 9s? Because we do have some audience members, I think, who are in junior high.
Yeah, so I think for me, like in grade 9, that's a really good time to volunteer at like your local hospital or your local old folks home. I find that those are areas which typically are accepting of volunteers, and they even have systems in place where you can document your volunteer hours, which could be useful down the road. For me personally speaking, I also did I volunteered for my local church. So just like as an altar server and as a lector, so like just reading. And I found that these were also good times to really just like kind of meet new people and learn a little bit more about things like medicine and just communicating with different people actually.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you, Jessica, for reading the question above. And I will help address Jenny's question, which is, how do you find out if the life of a medical student or a doctor is the right fit for you? It seems intense at times. I think that would be an understatement.
Yeah, for sure. I think that like comes with like a little bit of volunteering, but also I think it's a little bit about talking to people who are at that point in their lives. So for me, I talked with a few, like, and you don't just talk to one person, you want to talk with a couple of people because different people have different experiences. And so, yeah, I talked with a couple of doctors, and it's hard to find those connections at like a high school stage. But I think like as you go up in terms of your education, you will be able to find more and more folks who are more and more relevant to your field of interest.
Thank you, John. Our next question is from May, and she asks, what, out of all the fantastic rewards that you have received, which one do you most value and why?
Yeah, so I think there's been a lot that I've found are very like remarkable for me. I feel like humbled and honored to have received some of these awards. But I would have to say like just like because there's like a deep sentimental attachment to it, I would have to say it's the graduate thesis award. So I actually got the one that the grant that I received for my master's program. It was funded by someone called Dr. Stephanie Shapour. And she was a law student who had a motor vehicle accident, and she lost the function of both of her legs. So she was in a wheelchair, and she was the one who decided to donate the money to support me. And so I'm really thankful for what she did for me, because she came from an experience, she came from a position of like of actually having had an accident which caused her to be like immobile. And that was something that like I was able to do like through my research. So I felt like in doing the research, I was kind of giving back to her in a way. And that was what really made me feel honored to have received that award, because it told me that like the work that I was doing was meaningful and that it was actually being used to help someone. So yeah, so I'd like to shout out Dr. Stephanie Shapour in that sense.
All right, thank you again, John. We have another question in the chat that says, do you ever regret your choice to go down this path, or are you happy that the choice you made is going to help you achieve what you want to achieve in life?
So that's a good question. I think that there are definitely times when I've regretted certain choices as I journeyed down this path. For example, like I think like during like when I first started my research work, I found that there was some regrets because as I mentioned, like I really didn't like the wet lab research that I did. And I think like just because I've been in I was in a dark room a lot of times, like I actually felt like I was developing like seasonal affective disorder, which is like a type of like a disorder that can happen when you're in low lights for prolonged periods of time. So yeah, so I really felt like those were times when I really regretted it. And there were also times when, for example, when I found out that I didn't get into medical school, but like my friends and colleagues were like, there were some people who got in, and like I felt happy for them, but like at the same time, there was always like that bitterness, right, inside, because I felt like, oh man, I didn't get in this time, but somebody else did. So I think that's something that I had to come to terms with, and that at times, like there were conversations I had with friends who definitely had those regrets, and they said, yeah, I'm not going to bother applying to medicine anymore. I'm just going to try and walk a different path from now on. And I think those are hard decisions to make, and sometimes you will have to make those decisions, especially if, for example, you decide that like, you know, it's not worth the amount of effort, or if I'm like wasting too much time doing this and it's not productive. And those are like very unique decisions that everyone has to come to terms with. So I definitely feel for all of the people who've applied, who were probably like more than qualified to have received that privilege of being in med school, but actually being denied that opportunity. So yeah.
Thank you. I did get a private message about your opinion on dentistry and medicine. So it says, is it true that dentistry is easier to get into than medicine? And what are your thoughts on the differences between dentistry and medicine?
Yeah, so I don't think I've ever personally considered dentistry, although I have practiced with dentistry students. Just because dentistry also, they have the same style of interview questions as medicine. So I have had my opportunity to like talk with a couple of dental students. And I think like in terms of what you need to do and the work that you need to do, it's very similar. But they do have like a few differences in terms of coursework requirements and being able to like do like different type of assessments. So they have you do soap carving for dentistry. So there are some like procedural things which are different. But I think at the end of the day, like the skills that you need and the level of difficulty would be more or less the same to get in.
Thank you, John, for answering that. And we have our next question from Jenny again, and she is saying, are you able to have time for other hobbies, families, and friends while in med school? And is it hard to have a work-life balance?
Wow, thank you, Jenny, for all these enthusiastic questions. I would say that like there is definitely time for hobbies. I'm living with my family still, so I actually do have the opportunity to be with my family. And as I mentioned, my twin brother, he also got into medical school the same time that I did. So I actually have to put up with him like even at school. So yeah, it's quite challenging sometimes to actually be with your family as well. In terms of hobbies, yeah, I definitely think like there are certain hobbies, like as I mentioned, running. I find that those are the types of hobbies that I use for burnout and just keeping myself grounded. There are in med school, I find that there's little time for like friends outside of med school. A lot of times what I'm doing is like you're in school with like, for our class at least, we have 176 students in our med school class. So I think most of my time is spent with med students, just because we are all studying for the same thing, and we have cohorts and study groups and something called DL, which is type of learning environment where we're put into study groups. So yeah, so I do think that there is a lot of time, particularly for friends in medical school, but not like outside of medical school, unless they're like super close friends who you're keeping in touch with. So yeah, I would say to answer that final part of that question, it's quite difficult to maintain your work-life balance. particularly because of the high coursework and the high course load, but it is still possible.
All right, thank you, John. So the next question says, could you please also say something about the Top 30 Under 30 award?
Yeah, sure. So the Top 30 Under 30 award, that was one of the awards offered to students and I guess just anyone really, any youth under the age of 30. And it was offered by the Alberta Coalition of Global Cooperation. And to talk particularly about that award, what they were looking for was for youth who were doing work in the sector of sustainable development goals. So the United Nations released, I believe it was, I want to say 12 or 24 or something like that, sustainable development goals. So they include things like no hunger, reduced inequalities, gender equality, things like that. And what they do is they recognize youth in recognition of doing important work towards achieving a certain goal in their communities. And I think that was something that like I was able to do during my undergraduate degree with relation to some of the work that I did within the lab, because we did like a little bit of that telerehabilitation program, which involved working with rural environments and really trying to reduce the inequalities in healthcare for these people. So I think that was definitely one of the reasons why I received that award. And I think if you're interested in doing that, like I would definitely try to find research or volunteer opportunities that kind of help advance those goals. Again, I can provide links to Jing if you would like more information.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. And just as we're wrapping up, I think we could have about 2 more questions before we wrap up. So I know we have talked about being self-disciplined and motivated as well, but what is something that you do when you feel very unmotivated? What helps you to push through the lows when you feel like you are overwhelmed?
Yeah, so I think there's been quite a few times when I felt unmotivated, and I think that was especially the case like during Christmas break for me, just because I found that there were a lot of times in which I didn't want to do any work and I didn't feel like there was like a point really. So during those times, I think a really important thing to do was to reconnect with your family and your friends, and really relying on these support networks, because I found like when I was talking with people, I was kind of able to re-emphasize like the value of what I was doing and the value of what I was trying to give to the world. So at the end of the day, you want to really think about the reason why you wanted to do what you set out to do. And if you find like, if you talk with someone and they tell you like, oh, like you're like, so for example, like, I'm just trying to think back to when I got rejected to medical school one time. I was talking with a friend and they were saying how like, oh, do you not like do you not want to do medicine now? Do you feel like too discouraged to do it? And I really had to think about it at that time. And I said no, like I've already invested so much. So I think like, even though I'm not feeling motivated, I think I'll have to pick myself up again and, keep continuing to apply. And I think at the end of the day, like that conversation that I had was able to help me to like kind of push through that hard time, and I was able to overcome it. And I think, I'm sure there are similar people like within your lives, like parents, friends, or family who can help you during that time.
Thank you, John. Our next question, and maybe last, if anyone else has any more questions, please send them in the chat while we still have a few more minutes left. Our next question is there something you would do differently throughout your academic journey if you had the chance to?
Personally, like I felt that there were definitely times when I felt like I was not doing things correctly. There were times when I like, for example, like one time I actually had to drop a course because I felt that I was not able to succeed in it. So so I'll talk about my master's degree. And my master's degree was quite challenging just because I came in from a background of health sciences, and I moved to biomedical engineering, and I had no engineering background. So the first course that I did was very heavy on the coding and the mathematics and the physics. And I felt that I wasn't prepared for that, particularly because I was not trained in the math. I was more of like a scientist. And so that was something that I had to challenge with. And I had to end up dropping the course because I had a talk with my preceptor, and he said that, like, it's super tough to work your way up, especially when you're missing like 2 years of background engineering. And so those were like decisions which we had to make, which really was challenging for me. But at the end of the day, I think if I would have done it differently, like I would probably have to say no, because it still helped me to realize that this was like a very unique path that I myself was walking through. Like nobody else was going down this route, and so they probably didn't know the challenges or like the difficulties of traveling this path. And I think that's kind of what it taught me, and the failures were definitely helpful in helping me grow and become a stronger person. So yeah, I would say I didn't really regret anything.
Thank you for your answer, John. So next we have a question from Serena in the chat that says, do you need to have a degree in med school in order to get into veterinary school?
No, you don't actually. You can apply directly to vet school from undergrad.
Thank you. I also have another private message that says, kind of ties back into the last question about your regrets and everything. And it says, it takes a lot of determination to apply 5 times. Is there a time you considered that you would stop applying and choose a different path?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like honestly, like I can't really speak to it just because I haven't had more than, like, I haven't experienced it in any different way. But I think like just speaking on behalf of some of my friends who ended up deciding that wasn't the case. A lot of times, like there are certain realities that you'll eventually have to face. And I think that can be especially harder for people who have like other goals. Like for example, one of my friends, she said that she didn't want to like go through like the extra 4 years because she wanted to start a family. And I think like that's like a very valid reason to like stop applying, because she wanted to like, settle down and get married and eventually like be able to support a family. That was one of her goals. So thinking about that, like I think you do need to prioritize at some point. What do you really want out of life? Is it worth it to continue to apply to medical school, say after 5 times? Like if you are if you have other things to do, if you feel like there are other ways you can contribute to the world, and if there are other things that you feel that you would benefit from, like, so it is a little bit of goal assessment that needs to be done. And I don't think like other people, there's definitely other people who may decide to like quit after 1 time, or there may be other people who decide to quit after like 11 times, right? So that's just to say that whatever you do at the end of the day, you just need to reassess whether it's the right thing for you. And a lot of times the best way to do that is to talk with somebody else, or try to write it down and really try to say like, this is what I should do, number 1, and how badly do I really want to do this? You always want to ask yourself that.
All right, thank you, John. We just had another question in the chat, and it says, I've heard the advice that in medical school interviews, you shouldn't say, the reason you want to get into medical school is because you want to help people after you've witnessed a loved one who suffered from whatever the cause is. because the answer is too generic. To what extent is this true?
I think like to a certain extent, like that's kind of a reason that like everyone has. Just because like I've talked with others about this too, and I think like that is definitely the case that a lot of people want to get into medical school and want to pursue medicine. So I don't really see like the reason why, but like I would when I was practicing for medical school interviews, I definitely had like a different answer for why I chose to do medical school. And part of the reason why they say this is just because they don't want to seem like you're not like driven. So if you're saying that you're doing it to help other people, there's kind of like a connotation there that like you're not really doing it because you want to do it for yourself. You're doing it to like please others, and it's not like really what you want to do. So I think at the end of the day, that's kind of what they're getting at. So like for me, the way that I was able to spin this question was just saying that like, you know, for me, I really enjoyed working with technology, and I really enjoyed working with rehab robotics. So that was one reason why I wanted to get into medicine. And for other people, it might be something else. It might be like doing like for example, like in our class, there's someone who did like a PhD in history before applying. So for that person, it was really trying to understand the history of medicine and trying to connect it back to the future. So there are other reasons. And I think like those are things that you should consider when you're preparing for interviews. But like, I guess it's kind of unspoken that like everybody really wants to enter medicine to help other people. So I think that's part of the reason why it's kind of seen as generic and not really like helpful in when the application committee is assessing these types of interviews.
Awesome. Thank you so much for everyone's questions. And we just hit 8:30 p.m. and there are no more questions in the chat. That will be our time to wrap up. So I'm going to send, I just sent the information about John's email and of course our email if you'd like to reach us or to John with any follow-up questions. And I also included a link to our YouTube channel, which this recording will be later posted on. And I will also, I think later we will also email the link to everyone who has signed up through our registration form. So feel free to keep an eye out for that if you need. And once again, we just want to express our gratitude to John for taking the time, especially during your busy semester, start of the semester, to sit down and have a chat with us. And special thanks to Wendy and Jessica for taking the time to help and facilitate our discussion. And just wanted to say that we also have the pleasure of having John's twin brother, Peter, joining us sometime this month with his own Q&A workshop. So please stay tuned for the information about that if you'd like to hear more from these wonderful siblings. And yeah, thank you so much to everyone for joining, and please keep an eye out for our YouTube channel and keep up with our events. And just wondering if there are any, John, if you would like to say anything else before we wrap up and end up the night.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Yu Jing and Wendy and Jess. I would also like to thank May, who invited me here, as well as all of the COVID-19 volunteers who been involved behind the scenes, because we definitely appreciate all of the hard work that you're doing there, and we don't want to leave that unrecognized.
Thank you so much. And just to clarify as well, we will post this recording to our YouTube channel later on once it is edited. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for your attendance. And thank you, John. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Jessica. Hope everyone have a good night and best of luck with everything. Congratulations again, John, for receiving the 2021 Stars of Alberta Award. It was well deserved.
Thank you.
And we look forward to talking with your brother after.
That sounds good.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. We'll wrap up the night.